I'm so excited to have the authors of Rethinking Organizational Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with us today, a step-by-step guide for facilitating effective change. And, this is in the news a lot these days, and I'm really excited to hear what these gentlemen have to say. Our friends from Happy Valley, Pennsylvania. We have folks from Maryland here, New Jersey, California. We have Midwest representation, Texas, Toronto, let me see, Ohio. So we have a lot of people with us, and we're so happy about that. I thoroughly enjoyed reading your book, Dr. Rothwell and Mr. Ely and Campbell. There is so much learning in it about organizational DEI. And I also want to say, if you are hearing or listening to this on a replay, please press subscribe to get more wonderful videos like this. I'd also like to introduce our three amazing speakers. Dr. William Rothwell, I think we were sitting at a table at Benedictine's, one of Benedictine's lecture series.
Yes.
And I had no idea at first that I was sitting at a table with such greatness. But Dr. William Rothwell, PhD, SPHR, SHRM, SCP, RODC, CPTD fellow, and on. Distinguished professor of the Master of Professional Studies in Organization Development and Change program, and also the PhD program of Workforce Education and Development at Pennsylvania State University. He has authored, co-authored, and edited and co-edited 127 books. Philip Ely, MPS, is a retired U.S. Army officer where he spent time integrating women into previously restricted combat arms roles. He also developed U.S. and foreign militaries, building international coalitions. He works as the coaching coordinator for the Children, Youth, and Families RISK grant program. In this role, Mr. Ely trains and develops coaches that work with land grant universities on implementing government-funded programs for local communities. He is working on his PhD in Workforce Education and Development at Penn State, with an emphasis on human resource development and organization development. And he holds an undergrad degree from West Virginia State University. Jamie Campbell, Masters of Education, serves as the Assistant Dean for Diversity Enhancement Programs at the Smeal College of Business. He has served as a panelist on topics ranging from social justice to students' issues, has been a keynote speaker for various programs. He also serves as an advisor to special student organizations within the university. He continues to mentor graduates working in Fortune 500 companies. Campbell is a 1995 graduate of Morehouse College, where he obtained his BA in sociology. He also has his Master of Education with a concentration in adult education and in instruction education from Central Michigan University in 2003. He is as well a PhD student at Penn State, and his research focuses on succession planning as a form of crisis management. Wow. I am so excited to hear from you today, gentlemen. And I think our friends are as well. So if anybody has a question, if you could put it in the chat, and we will, I will help monitor the chat. If we are making good time at some point, we may ask you to unmute yourself and ask the question yourself. But we really want to be timely in relation to time. So if you could do that, that would be great. Who is going to start us off today?
I will be the first speaker.
All right.
So that's our title, Rethinking Organizational Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. We like to open with some quick questions to get our audience thinking quickly. So what percentage of change initiatives fail? We've been in the OD field. We've heard that statistic cited probably more than we want to hear it. So what percentage do you think are failures? 70 plus, someone says, good. 90%, yeah, there's a pessimist for you, yes, okay. Anyone else have guesses there? 85%, 80%. Okay, these are high numbers. 95%, all right. Next question. It's about 50%, depending on who you read.
Okay.
And top-down initiatives are thought to be more effective than open source change initiatives. True or false? Is that true or false?
Hmm.
Okay, so the
False.
answer is false. So top down, one way to think of that is boss driven change, where you're ordered to make a change, whether you like it or not. Open source, we involve people in the decision making. Here's another one. Effective change initiatives can happen without changing. True or false?
True.
Yes,
I'm gonna say
false.
false. I'm gonna say
Who's
false.
that question to me is kind of like who's buried in Grant's tomb. That kind of question, you know, because by definition. So what about work is done once a change initiative has been implemented? Is that true or false?
False.
False.
Yeah, good.
Work is never done, right?
Work is never done and change is continuous and continuing. So we need to get some terms clear, and this issue has been driven home to me in more than one talk in front of groups specializing in organization development. Not everyone even agrees on what OD is. Yes, you can flip open Chris Worley text on Cummings and Worley text on OD and read the definition, but there's a lot of people enrolled in doctoral programs in OD that I would argue don't have even a solid foundation in what OD actually is, what the history is. You can argue with me about that, but we have to get some of our terms clear. So what do we mean by change management? And why would we care about this in the context of rethinking diversity, equity, and inclusion? Well, we need to think about how we will go about implementing a diversity, equity, and inclusion effort. And when we were writing the book, Philip, Jamie, and I were thinking of a person who was handed the assignment by his or her boss to set up a DE&I program in an organization that had never had one, and how would they go about the process if they had no clue what to do and perhaps no background in change? Well, one way they could go about it is use a compliance mentality. And we know what that's like. Use a hammer. And when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yes.
And that's one of the problems. In many cases, organizations use a policy approach to change. And what they do is they develop a diversity, equity, and inclusion policy and then force it down onto the organization. And the sign of that is a zero tolerance policy where people might be fired without warning based on a single event and without, in some cases, proper due diligence even being applied in the investigation.
And you know, Bill,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead. Who
So
spoke out?
So this can risk major blowback. So what's
Bill, I worry about when I see the hammer, who's going to get pounded down?
well, that's just it. Who is going to get pounded down?
Yes,
And there could end up being a lot of people pounded down.
yes.
Change management does tend to be associated with top-down change. But when I say top-down in this context, I don't necessarily mean driven by bosses. What I mean is there is a school of thinking in change management that what the company should do, or the organization, if it's not a company, is develop a single change model to drive all organizational change efforts. And I'm very much aware of this. I was at FedEx when they did this at FedEx. They came in, they developed a committee of people. They trained them on all the existing major change models, like ProSize ADCAR model and Lewin's action research model and Cooper Ryder's appreciative inquiry model and Cotter's model and all the models out there on how to manage change. And then they tasked the committee to come up with one unified change model that would drive all change efforts in the organization. And when the committee was finished, they went upstairs, presented it to the senior executive team as a proposal. And of course, the senior executive people got their fingerprints on it and started playing around with it. And they ended up with a single unified change model that they could use for everything, whether it was making an engineering change or an IT change or an HR programmatic change or any kind of change, a new sales campaign in the organization. No matter what it was, they would use the same change approach. And of course, the thinking there is that one of the major reasons people experience resistance to change is that they are scared of what will happen next. If we use an ad hoc approach to change, where we have no idea what's going to happen, then people get scared, and that leads to resignations. It leads to highly disengaged workers who sabotage company efforts. And there can be many problems stemming from the anxiety people feel about ad hoc change, where they don't know what will happen next. Somebody chatted, yes, a cookie cutter approach, and that's more or less the logic of this. The advantage of it is it takes the mystery out of the process, or at least much of the mystery. If shoe one drops, we know that shoe two will drop, because we've all been trained in the change model the company is using. Companies that are engineering corporate cultures love this approach. It's extremely logical. Step one, step two, step three, step four, without variation. So that's one way we could implement a diversity, equity, and inclusion program. I'm not arguing in favor of that, but there have been many organizations that have used a compliance approach, and a lot of people end up getting hammered. An alternative is organization development. As I said, not everyone agrees on definitions. I find out there in the world that there are two camps. One camp is steeped in the history of OD. They know all about Kurt Lewin, David Cooper Ryder. They are very familiar with Jervis Bush and his work on dialogic OD. They know all about the history of OD, where it came from, and its key principles of facilitating change rather than imposing change or using a cookie cutter approach to change. The OD approach is to facilitate, and that word basically means ask people rather than tell people. Facilitate is all about asking people. And then we identify the problems from the people. We set the priorities based on what the people believe. We ask the people how we should solve those problems. We ask the people what the priorities are to solve those problems. We ask the people how to implement their solutions. We ask the people how to measure the success of the effort. And if the people don't know, we give them information, but we never tell them the answer. So the OD approach is very different from its opposite, which I believe is the performance consulting approach. Nothing wrong with that approach, by the way. Neither one is particularly good or bad. It all depends on the people and the type of problem and the issues and the speed at which we need results. So a bottom-up approach to change means it bubbles up from the people of the organization, and we trust the people's knowledge, and we try to unleash everyone's creative thinking. So if we apply that approach to DE&I, we get a very different approach than we get with a compliance-oriented mentality where we use a hammer and beat people.
Dr. Rothwell?
Yeah.
There's a comment in the chat. Someone says, leadership drives the change, which needs to be communicated to all.
Yeah.
And I think I would agree with that. But what you're saying is leadership needs to harness and involve participants at all levels of the organization, correct?
That's exactly right. And
Okay.
unfortunately, many managers, even if they have a Harvard MBA, have not been trained on the principles of change, and they're clueless. And yet much of their job, if they're a CEO, much of their job involves managing change efforts. How can you do that if you're unaware completely of all of the existing change methods that are available? So leadership is more than just ordering people around like a straw boss, ordering people and getting off on the power involved with that. Using methods from both approaches, well, be careful. Some people don't even know what OD looks like. They've never seen it in action. Where do most managers learn how to manage? From their bosses. And where did their bosses learn? From their bosses, all the way back to the very beginning of management in 1911 or thereabouts. And the first book on management published in 1911, Fred Taylor's book, Principles of Scientific Management. And so it would be great if people knew enough to be able to use both approaches, but quite often they're clueless. They have no idea about anything else other than order people around. So
Dr. Rothwell, Kristen says, I've been managing corporate teams for 15 years now, and different teams, associates respond to different methods of change management.
that's true. If you're an advocate of situational leadership,
Mhm.
we tie our leadership methods to the level of experience of the group.
Mhm.
That can be a factor to consider. It's difficult to pull great ideas out of people who have no ideas to begin with or no experience base. It's also very unwise to try to order around people who have more experience and knowledge than you do as a leader. It's better to tap and facilitate that.
Yeah.
In many organizations, there is a wealth of knowledge that is often overlooked because management claims, oh my God, we have an emergency. We need to make the decision right now. And often this leads to problems downstream because people don't understand why those decisions were made the way they were
Right.
and what information was used. And there might have been many issues that were overlooked in the speed to get a solution implemented. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Expediency driving the change rather than using a thoughtful approach. And there are many ways we can do that. There's software that allows us to tap the thinking of hundreds of thousands of people in real time. So why would we necessarily believe it's slow to insist on the leader always making all of the decisions? So, yeah, great questions. Of course, we know the history of OD. There is a history of success. If you've read Golumbowski's work, Ironies in Organization Development, you know the average ROI of an OD intervention is 500%. That's the average. But the book was entitled Ironies in OD simply because the ROI hinges on the management commitment to use an organization development approach. So if management doesn't use it, they won't achieve that level of return on investment. That's the point, and that's the irony.
Nancy has a very interesting comment. She says, what if leadership is causing harm in their reactivity and responses, lack of willingness to collaborate, and lack of DEI competencies? What if they are not willing to be accountable?
Yeah, well, those are tough situations. I've been in those myself. And when I was doing research years ago on my dissertation, I once asked a senior executive in a Fortune 10 company, what happens when there's a failure of leadership at the top? And his answer was, well, you either float your resume or somehow you get that person fired. That's pretty grim. But what are the options? We'd love to say, coach that person and give them some ideas about a better way of behaving and getting results. Coaching works sometimes with people who want to be coached. But as all psychologists know, you can't help people who don't want to be helped. No. So you work with what you have. So that's the message here about the 500% return. Of course, there's another approach from Lewin's model that has become popular in recent years. That's appreciative inquiry, which goes by other names, positive change, or strengths-based change, or strengths-based management, positive organizational scholarship. All of those are other names for the idea of looking for strengths and building on those. A key advantage of that, of course, is that we're able to skip the blame storming phase that often happens when we embark on problem solving. If there's a crisis or the company has a problem, the first thing that happens is often the leaders don't look for a solution, they look for someone to blame. And that does not move us forward. That wastes our time, that spins our wheels. So the appreciative inquiry approach is an alternative, and it too could be used with a DE&I implementation. Next slide. So here's some quick questions. What percentage of companies have implemented diversity efforts? What do you think?
50%?
Just guess if you don't know. Somebody said 25, 40, 40. 40 seems to be a popular number. Somebody said 10, 20. All right, we're all over the place. 91% of companies, and of course we know there are thousands of job openings right this moment for diversity officers. Some of those paying pretty well. But what are they looking for? What percentage of companies want a more inclusive corporate culture and environment? What do you think? a guesstimate again. 100%. Several people say that. 15, wow, that's quite different. 71% according to research from Gartner. I think they want it from the bottom for the bottom line. Yes, that's true. There are some corporate leaders who are only interested in diversity for appearance sake. These are the same people that pay lip service to everything. So what percentage of employees agree that diversity is important to employee progression? What do you think? 80%. Okay, that's a good guess. Anyone else? 60. Okay. 42% according to research from the same study. So not as much as perhaps we might think. Okay, so diversity is, fill in the blank in your chat box. We're just looking to spark some thinking here about what we mean by that term. What is diversity? Difference.
One of my favorite quotes on diversity is, diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance.
Oh, I like that. That's nice. Inclusiveness. Yeah, we link those. Some people get tied up with the definitions and the differences between diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice. There are many other terms that we could toss out there, and sometimes it isn't clear, particularly to company leaders, what are the differences among those terms. They might struggle with those. And that can happen to someone who's trying to set up a DE&I program. So that's what we were trying to deal with in our book. So I'll turn it over to Philip now.
So one of the things that is important is to understand that baseline that Dr. Rothwell just went through. You have to understand that we came at this from an OD approach, from more of a positive strength-based AI approach. And one of the key things that organizations have to do is they have to answer that diversity question themselves. What is diversity for them? Because for each organization, that's going to look a little bit different. But what we did is we tried to lay out steps. So a step action drill, so to speak, of how do we get to where we want to be? And it's based off this conceptual framework of you have to look at organizational culture, talent management, networking, because all those have a relationship with each other and have a relationship with organizational diversity. So when we start off with that organizational culture, kind of like what we said up front when we asked the question, can you have a change effort if you don't change your organizational culture? No, you can't, because your culture affects everything. It's embedded in everything you do. So the first step is you got to define what your culture is. What are your symbols? What are the things that make you as an organization? Because that's going to affect everything else that's going on. And we'll see a little bit of that here in a second. Next, you have to clarify the role of DEI within your organization. How is that going to affect what you do and what your culture is? And then you have to actually look at who has authority to change. And again, the first thing that you have to understand is that culture will change over time. The key is, are you going to manage that change? Are you going to help influence the direction that change goes? Or are you going to let it go in a different direction that you may or may not want? So as we look at that, the next thing is looking at talent management. So when we start at step 4, we walk people through looking at how do we do this talent management thing? So what's that pipeline? And again, we start to see the effects of that organizational culture already. Because if I'm in, let's say, the military, then I start off by saying, I want people who are usually a lot younger, about 18 years old, just coming out of high school, right? Because I'm gonna always promote from within. We don't do promotions from outside of the military. So I have to develop all of my talent in-house. So my onboarding is going to look a lot different, and where I recruit is going to look a lot different. When we look at maybe a law firm, their recruitment is going to look different because they're not going to do as extensive onboarding. They're going to want somebody who's already passed law school, who already's passed the bar. So their recruiting efforts are going to look at a little bit older population. So again, your culture is already affecting your pipeline. It's already affecting how you're going to do your talent development. And it's already going to affect how you look at your relational dynamics. So these are just some of the steps that we talk about when we talk about talent management, and you can see the impact of culture has and the influence that both of these things have on each other. So one of the things that we also talk about is how do you showcase your talent? Because again, when we want to increase our DEI efforts, we have to look across the board at how we're showcasing that talent. How are you putting somebody in front of decision makers who are going to make decisions on promotions? How are you going to showcase their talent on paper? So how do you, what paperwork do you look at when you are promoting somebody? So what all these different things that are going on, you have to look at your systems and how they affect each other. Because again, you can have a great pipeline, but if you're not showcasing that talent, then are they getting those promotions?
Yeah.
So all these things are interrelated to each other. But going back to the book and how we lay things out, we talk about these steps. We talk about how to go from step A to step B and so on and so forth. But we also do it again from that OD approach. Going back to defining your culture, you have to look at, we defined our culture, but how does the leadership see it? How does the majority of the people see it? How do each of the minority populations within our organization see it? And again, when I say minority populations, I'm not necessarily talking about ethnic minorities. I'm talking about, are we talking about disabled people? Are we talking about gender? Are we talking about neurodiversity? There's a lot of different things. So as you can see, this is all tied to each other. As we saw in that framework, it all affects everything else. So if you want to increase your diversity, first you have to define what you mean by that. You have to define what it is. But these are the steps that you go through and make it.
I love your definition in the book. Culture does not make people, people make culture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So next, we want to talk about networking. So when we look at networking, research tells us that this is so important, especially for ethnic minorities and other underrepresented populations. Your networks help drive whether or not you're going to be successful or not. So you want to look at mentors. You want to look at your sponsors. You want to look at your peer networking. And one way to really get after that is through employee resource groups, or ERGs. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamie, and he's going to start us off with some ERGs and take us through. And Jamie, you're muted. So
I really love, Jamie, while you're unmuting, Shim says, diversity is acceptance of others, bringing your human soul to work.
Right. And also another aspect, we like to say, bringing your whole self. And
yeah,
as we constantly talk about it, in this idea of looking at how we go through networking, how we use the ERGs. And for reference, the ERG is the Employee Resource Group, or you'll hear them known as affinity groups, or BSGs, or business BRGs rather, business resource groups. So you'll hear those three terms, but also when we talked earlier, we mentioned about the definition of diversity and the quote that was used about diversity being how we looked at diversity in terms of being asked to the party, or and inclusion being meaning you're invited to the dance. Well,
yeah.
The other aspect of adding on to that is when we talk about belonging, because now when we get belonging, we're now asking which music do you like, or you're able to play your music at this party, making it a complete inclusive event. And so that's what we want to do with ERGs, because they stand as good communicative points for the organization. They stand as points where people can get together and they can be this informal situation. And you all know what the informal is like. These are the hallway meetings.
Yes.
These are the chance interactions, whether it be the 30-second elevator pitch, the coffee moment, or the Keurig moment. I know we do Keurigs now, but it's about that engagement and that development of, hey, I like them. Hey, I wanted to meet Kimberley. I wanted to get to know more about Phil. That engagement is the organic, the informal, and just naturally occurring. When you have these situations in organizations, it usually can be members of a group are sitting at a table trying to figure it out. I know of an organization where they sat at a table, didn't really have an opinion, didn't really have an agenda, but they started meeting, and then someone had the idea to say, oh, we're actually a group. And they took it through and they became an LGBTQ plus network. So that's the inorganic. But then when we get to the formal is that dedicated, targeted approach. It is that link where you push out and you can see the idea of what it means. So then we're looking at these structured groups. These structured groups and these structured organizations where you talk about it's a set time frame. So you'll have maybe the Black Employee Resource Group or the Women's Network or the Parents Network. Remember, Phil already said when we talk about diversity, we're looking at so many different dimensions. We're not just limiting diversity to race. Many companies and organizations, when they look at diversity, sometimes they stop at race and ethnicity. And if they're really on it, they go to gender. But then they forget that it's more than that. Yeah. It's more than that engagement. It's about ability. It's about age. It's about all these different dynamics of diversity. And these formal focus groups can help organizations when they have issues, when there's issues of climate, when there's issues of culture. They don't serve as quote unquote white knights or panaceas. They serve as individuals coming together with supportive, appreciative comments. So it's not just something that randomly occurs. And it works even better when they're supporting. We can go to the next.
Tanya says, and to add to the analogy, if they don't know how to dance, teach them.
Hey, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with a good electric slide that everybody can learn. And it goes across culture. It grows across dynamic, right?
Yep.
There's a country music version. There's an R&B version. It's all types. And that's what we're talking about when everybody comes. So I get it. They're running by a little too fast for me to catch on. But Phil,
I know the comments are so good.
But we'll try to come back to those. But Phil, we're going to go to points. So when we talk about the evaluation part of this, remember when we're going through evaluations, we want to kind of do the Stephen Covey method, right? Begin with the end in mind. What do we want? What should our engagement look like? This is kind of when we talk about what does success look like? What does success feel like? And it's not just about numbers. Please understand, when we're talking about implementation of diversity efforts, it's not always about percentages. Like I know we always say metrics, right? That's the word we got to use. But sometimes it's about what do we want in the end? How do we want to feel? Diversity initiatives in or within organizations are a head and heart situation. You have to get it. Dr. Kelso, I saw that. Value people. Absolutely. We put that first. And then we're talking about how we engage our employees, what are they doing, and how are they going to be able to move forward. So after we get to the desired end state, let's look at how we're going to evaluate it. Because what I see as success may not be what you see as success. Is it quantity or quality? When we're doing diversity programs, a lot of times we may not have diversity numbers. So we're looking at doing education. So we don't say necessarily the number of African-American employees that attend, the number of Hispanic attendees, the number of transgender employees that attend. We might just say the number of people. Like that would be my metric. But someone else may say something different. So it's good before you plan these out to get on the same page, because success is not the same for everyone. And when we're talking about quality and quantity, we have to go. And in that, we're looking at the current state. Because when people talk about diversity initiatives within organizations, they're automatically saying, we're going to do this and tomorrow night, it's going to be great. We're going to be a diverse organization. So for those of you, because I saw we have people from all over the place, right? For those of you that have a green thumb, have you ever planted a seed and the next day it's a full-blown tree?
Not yet.
That doesn't work. Well, I know we're doing cotton candy, grapes and stuff like that, but we're not quite there yet. So we have to look at where we are to see where we want to be. We have to assess our current state and its steps. And the fourth situation that we're talking about, it's really, as we're assessing where we are, it's about having those conversations to understand where we're going and how we're going to get there. Where are our gaps? It's almost like looking at that, almost a SWOT analysis or a Johari window situation where you're looking and saying, okay, what do we know? What's there? What do people think of us? How are we going to interact? Where are our gaps? And so all that engagement comes into these first 4 steps. And then as we move forward to the 5th step, evaluations. This is when your ERGs can come into play. This is when your BSGs can come into play because they can talk it through. Interim evaluations. Just simply check in. Hey folks, is this looking well? Hey, are you seeing something different here? Is there a change within how the organization is operating? And so when we continue to move forward, we'll start to see. We'll start to have actions because remember, we've done the assessment. We understand where we are. We've checked in with our BRGs, and now we're starting to complete these activities. And now we're starting to be able to sit back and talk with the folks who actually were receiving these activities from the implementations. And so now we can report out to the organization. And the last part of that is so important, reporting out to the organization. Because when you report out to the organization, this allows both senior, middle, lower management to be able to say, oh, this is working. Now, in some cases, it may not be working as fast, but remember, we're looking for positive movement. So in that, it's about being able to say, what are our victories? We haven't won it yet completely, but we're getting there. And then last, we start to create this plan of control because now we're saying, okay, we didn't do this. What are our key indicators? Remember, this is almost, in some cases, will be like a first pancake. If you haven't had it before, did you know it was supposed to be round? For some of us that can cook, we say, yeah, every pancake's gonna be round. For some of us that can't, you might wind up with a square pancake. It's okay. It's about what happens next. The key performance indicator would be, now I know my pancake should be circular. How am I going to make that happen? Understanding what it takes to move to that goal. And next slide. And then we talk about future trends. And this is where we're all coming to a head very quickly. Kimberly, I think you said initially how you remember we took us a long time to get to this point.
Yes.
Our future is coming in incredibly quick. So what's going on with diversity and how are we looking at these trends? And one of the main keys is this idea of diversity fatigue. So we looked at diversity fatigue as an idea of people of color, African Americans, Latinx, Hispanic, women, of different orientation. As they're going through, they're constantly talking about it. Some people would say, I'm reliving my trauma. Some people would say, well, I don't want to teach you. And it's okay for them to say that in the workplace. It is okay to have an equal expectation for folks to understand what their colleagues are going through. It's okay, but there'll be other people that'll be willing to help teach and coordinate and get involved and get engaged. But on the other side of that is, oh my God, we had a Black president. We're done with diversity. We did it. We have a Black vice president. Great, we're good. We can stop now. Kimberly, to your point earlier, the work never stops.
Yeah.
Diversity never stops. It is a continuing cycle because it is always supportive of someone who is underprivileged, underrepresented. Tokenism, I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to put someone in there, and no person wants a person that looks like them to be in there and be minimized.
Yes.
We prefer to have people in place of power that are quality persons. And we'll work through that. But diversity fatigue is something on both, not only for the people of color, but for people who are not in that necessary space who say, I think we're done. It's about our education and how we provide of going through. Nancy, if I could see you, I would hug you. That's a beautiful statement. Racial battle fatigue. I like that. We're good. Phil, next. Gender identity. I'm not going to really talk a lot because I think we all understand the plight that we're in right now when we talk about who we are and how people are allowed to identify or not identify. Who's in control? How is that going to work?
Can I just say, I love this comment by Shim. The ideal goal is to set it up so that it's a more balanced approach, so that it doesn't end per se.
No, I think that's correct. And when we talk about diversity initiative, Shin, I think that is actually what we're speaking to.
Yep.
Being balanced across, but understanding that at the end of the day, we can never rest on our laurels. We can never feel comfortable saying, okay, we've done this, we're done. Because then we neglect those other aspects of it. Remember, diversity is not just about race and gender. Diversity could be on socioeconomic, diversity could be about ability, and equity for all. We'll keep with that. Phil, we'll go next piece. Artificial intelligence now is coming more into play, more so than ever before. With these trends of selection and process, how are we using computers? What are we doing? No, we'll go with that. How are these things going in the process? How is this engagement working? When we talk about the board of directors, what we're looking at now is how CEO boards are looking different in these Fortune 500 corporations. Remember, we're looking at the number of African Americans who are CEOs, the number of women that are CEOs in these Fortune 500, and the number of people who look different who sit on these boards. The board of directors now is being looked at by consumers, by your clients, by your potential workforce. They're looking to see what your board of directors look like. And if someone looks like them, that's on the pictures on those walls that go around. Diversity, of course, there's going to be evolution. We are going to continually look to add, look to figure out how we can be more inclusive, how we can be more successful in bringing more people into this. We want to move past the idea of being a melting pot or a salad bowl. We want to be a kaleidoscope. I don't know if any of you all remember what a kaleidoscope looked like when you looked through it, but it was all colors standing out, being different, but working together and moving to one, well, if you did it right, one great picture. It wasn't just one color or one situation. Now the shrinking globe, it always works generationally. And it works generationally because your kids and my kids, your nieces, your nephews, they get it faster than we do. And it ties to this last piece. In the workplace, if you think about it, there are almost 5 different generations in the workplace at any one given moment, which goes to the shrinking globe because my kids, your kids knew it beforehand. Your nieces and nephews knew it beforehand whenever they picked up Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I think TikTok is the bane of the universe, but TikTok, because they're meeting people and engaging people from all over the world. As you're looking at these generational differences, how are you going to integrate these folks in the workplace? How are you going to make it so that the more seasoned, the elderly among us can work with the young people like Dr. Rothwell? How are you going to have them integrate when they're using WhatsApp? And I'm still trying to figure out how to FaceTime. For those of you that or your parents are still with us, think about when you try to get your parents to interact with their grandchildren by FaceTime. What happens now that we're all Zooming? Because we're all Zoom experts now. What happens as we're Zooming and we're trying to get engaged? What happens when we go to 3D processing? Because that's a new part of it, right? But think about when we go to 3D technology, when we're going to be in the room. I know it's a big thing in movies, but it's not too far-fetched to think that it's possible. What do you do with these generations that are living longer? I mean, we don't send them out on a raft, but we include them. How are we more inclusive? How are we more engaged with them? So this idea of the shrinking globe and generational differences comes together, it's important for us to understand that in the workplace, all of these things are next. And if we don't pay attention to each point regarding and respecting them for their differences, but at the same time respecting them and understanding their importance, it could cause an issue for us in the long run when it comes to how we work. Now we'll go next. And so we want to thank you, because we're 9 minutes out. So we want to thank you for your time, but we also want to go and let you know that this is our book. You can always get to the QR code. You can always feel free to welcome us, to talk with us at any point, and we look forward to that. There's also a YouTube channel which Phil has created with some of the authors actually speaking about the individual pieces of their chapters, so you have the opportunity to see
Oh,
that.
wonderful.
But we wanted to try to end out, and I'm a minute over, so we wanted to try to end out with about 10 minutes left so that we really could have the dialogue, because this is where the ideas come from. And as Kimberly said, in the chat, there was so much going by so quick, I couldn't address it all. But I wanted to make sure that we got an opportunity to at least engage.
Oh,
And
can you share what the YouTube link is? Is it under the book's name or?
if you
Yeah, I'll pull it up and put it in the chat.
Okay, that would be awesome. And can I just say, I really love your use of employee resource groups. I mean, I just think that is so wonderful. And there's a quote from the book, a Somali proverb: "A bridge is repaired only when someone falls into the water." And I just think that with your use of employee resource groups, you're being proactive, not reactive.
No, and that's part of it, because the
Yeah.
employee resource group we see as a key thing, or as a key performance indicator, or a key indicator of the culture and climate of the organization. Because your culture can say one thing, but your climate will tell you the truth. Your culture is everything you put out in your program, your picture. You know, you all know the warm and fuzzy picture. We're all holding hands, teaching the world to sing. But your climate, when people engage with your organization, it is your climate that will be able to keep and retain employees, and also attract not only new employees, but new clients. And someone said earlier about the bottom line. If we do these things in our organizations, the bottom line will expand not only by marketplace, but within the marketplace, but by market share as well.
So if anybody has a question and you'd like to unmute and ask, that would be wonderful. Yes, the recording will be sent to you. I forgot to mention, this talk is being sponsored by the International Society for Organization Development and Change, isodc.org. Please check out the organization. There's a lot of wonderful people who are doing a lot of similar work to this, that are trying to make a positive difference in the world. So who has a question?
Okay, so I actually have a comment. And I guess, so I've been talking to people about this diversity, equity, and inclusion, and there's so much confusion around it. But leaders are developing these programs and not understanding. And this was very detailed, because I just finished my dissertation and I looked at employers' practices with the reasonable accommodation request process, because I said that if diversity, equity, and inclusion is working right, then reasonable accommodation will function like it's supposed to, because you can tell, because there's a 40% difference in people with and without disabilities currently. And the employment landscape is like really, and I think in order for the culture to change, communication has to happen with and around this subject.
And there's a communication plan in here. The importance of communicating and branding your program.
Right. I haven't read the book yet.
Which I thought was so wonderful. So wonderful.
But Dr. Kelso, I wanted you to go to finish your point, because I think, and Kimberly, I appreciate you pointing that out as well. That's great work. But I wanted you to go back to it, because I think where you were going is something that we've been talking about. And actually it kind of leads into what we're trying to do next. So we also have don't worry, we have another book coming. No, but it also leads into what we were thinking about next in terms of not only the accessibility, but the aspect of the social change part of it.
Yeah, social change.
Yeah, and and for me, I think so. I interviewed managers for my dissertation, and so I looked at visible and invisible disabilities. And so in these managers, nobody knew what the laws were. The interactive process, they think it's just communication. And it's not. It's an actual employer-specific framework that's been around since 1990 that nobody actually looked at. And they didn't mandate it for everybody to use until 2008 when the change happened, because it was so much stuff happened with the ADA that the ADAA had to come into play. And so it's just amazing that, DEI is now a big buzzword, but everybody is trying to put something in place, but they don't really know how to, because I actually had the privilege of talking to an inspector general just by accident. And I was telling him about, what I wrote my dissertation on. And he said, oh, we're developing a program or a section for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I said, but do y'all really understand the impact on the employees? Because if all of this stuff fails, it affects me as an employee. Knowledge is power. And I think if we give managers the knowledge, skills, and abilities for a reasonable accommodation request process, and also diversity, equity, and inclusion, where they really understand it, because nobody understands. You can't implement what you don't understand.
And that was one of the reasons, as Dr. Rothwell said, and as Phil said, with the overall reach of this text.
Right.
The whole point of the book was, when we looked at it and when we talked about it, it was about all of these organizations creating diversity ideas and just putting people in there.
Right.
So you look like you might be able to do it. Go create this diversity program. So what we wanted to do was give folks an idea on how to do it step by step. We also wanted to do it where they could get it from varying voices and varying ideas and angles. So it was similar to what you're talking about. We just happened to come across the way and find a group of folks that we could say what you wanted to do. So we greatly appreciate that, but that was what our purpose was in this text. So when you get a chance,
I'm gonna connect with y'all.
We haven't come up with the audio yet, but we'll let Phil read it, and then we'll go from there.
And Dr. Kelso, I'm so sorry I interrupted you. I just get so excited sometimes. And but I want to tell you this book. I was trying to describe it to some people last night, and I was like, it's kind of like a primer, right? For DEI. I mean, it defines things. It's step by step. I mean, I was just so impressed.
Our point was, Kimberly, to write a book for those people who've been tasked to set up a program, a DE&I program, but they don't know how. They have no background in change theory. They just don't know what to do.
Right. And could you tell us a little bit about what you have on the horizon? You alluded to it.
Well, I'm so glad you asked.
Jamie, you want to discuss it?
Nah, Doc, you start. Philip and I'll clean up. We're good.
All right. So basically, our logic is that you can't have a successful DE&I program inside an organization if the community and the nation outside of that organization is running the opposite direction. So how do we redirect company or organizational change efforts from inside to outside? How do we use an organization as a platform to essentially bring about social change?
That is brilliant.
So I just gave a talk at the OD Network conference on the topic of relating internal and external organizational change. How do we bring about societal change as well as organizational change? So that's a very big topic. And you might say, well, corporate social responsibility is all about that, but no, it isn't. The way companies have managed CSR is to throw money at social problems and then walk away. You know, give money to United Way and trust them to go handle all of our social problems. And that just doesn't work. So how do we build a more effective as well as organization? So that's the logic of it. Jamie, Philip, you want to add to that?
We have a couple of really good questions in the chat. Melissa has a question. And I'm losing it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I saw it, Melissa. I saw it.
She's been asked to join a board of directors as a DEI effort. Since joining, she's been digging into statistics around board diversity and have been inspired to be part of the driving change here. Do you have any recommended organizations to look into or any other resources to point her to?
And
besides
yes,
your
Jamie,
book?
I
She's
saw
reading your book.
Jamie's, I apologize, my video is not working today.
Okay.
I saw, Jamie, your comment to reach out offline, and I absolutely will. This is something I'm really passionate about, especially after digging into the statistics. I am committed to being part of the change, whatever that takes, because it's really disheartening. And also, I think it's honestly necessary for the health of our organizations, for the health of our country, the health of our world, that we get better representation on boards. So I am absolutely going to reach out. Thank you for that offer.
And Nancy has a question. How have you been able to move resistant leadership from aspirational DEI work to operationalize their DEI efforts?
And I would just say that that's exactly where this book is trying to lead us to, because when you looked at how we laid it out, a lot of those steps very rarely talked about DEI, even though when you do all these steps, that's what you're going to do. You're going to increase that DEI, because when you put more people in front of decision makers, and you are able to showcase that talent more, when you actually sit down and look at your organizational culture, and again, thinking through that OD aspect, not just from what the leadership says, but you actually put in front of somebody in black and white, hey, look, certain people just aren't good with this, and here are the reasons why. You can help out. But the thing that you have to realize is that everybody that's in a leadership role is not a leader. Say that one more time.
Yeah.
Is not a leader. Leadership is another skill set, and some people are good at it and some people are bad at it. Unfortunately, if you have somebody that's in that leadership role that's horrible at it, sometimes you're stuck with that until something happens when they leave. Ultimately, you want to try to lead up, meaning you want to try to help them out. And you do that by doing some of the things that we talked about. So we talk about metrics. We talk about showing that ROI. We talk about, the research, and it talks about how impactful diversity is to the bottom line. And so the best thing you can do, if they're not all on board, at least get them out the way so that you can do what you need to do, so that you can go through these steps and you can define your culture. You can, look at how you're going to change that culture. You can look at how you're going to do that talent management. You can look at all these different programs. And again, when you add that diversity to your board, it helps you think through things. For example, since, we're talking about disabilities, if an organization says, hey, we're going to do this new health initiative, and we're going to say we're going to shut down all the elevators in our building so people take the steps, because we're trying to increase people's steps and we're trying to do this and that and everything else. What if I'm in a wheelchair?
Right.
What if I just had a vehicle accident and I'm in a cast? So, increasing that diversity helps you think through problems, helps you see things that others just take for granted. Because I know I might take that for granted, I could probably take more steps. But again, the more we do these things, the more we add to this, the more we open up our mind, because those biases are just that they're just the default. And we can, if we acknowledge that we have those biases and we get after it, we can help change some of them, or at least be able to put those in front when we're making decisions.
That is so true. And I'm a big fan, or I'm a big fan of the iceberg of ignorance, which is, only 4%. This is by Sydney Yoshida. Only top managers, senior leaders, they really only know 4% of the problems in their organization. Middle managers, maybe 74%. Supervisors, maybe 40-some%. But frontline employees, they know almost 100%, right? Because they see it all. And that's why leaders need to include these people because, sometimes it's bias, but sometimes they just don't know what they don't know, right?
Yeah.
That argues in favor of an OD approach.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get, Nancy, I saw your hand, but I wanted to try to answer your question. Because I saw what you said in the text. I think one of the ways you get them to move from resistant to aspirational is make them look at their competitors. When you see a competitor that's utilizing diversity, right? Many of us understand what the business case for diversity is, right? And in the 5-second window, if you use diversity, your teams will be better. If you have a team mixed gender, it gets better. If you have a team that's racially diverse, if you have a team that's socioeconomically diverse, and I'm not just talking about diversity of thought as the engagement goes. I'm simply saying you begin to see what happens next. So for example, Samsung, I just happen to have my phone on my desk. Samsung looks at Apple. What is Apple doing? Apple looks at LG. The same thing happens with diversity. If we begin to see that if Samsung has a transgender spokesperson out there, LG might say, we need to have a transgender spokesperson. And granted, remember what Dr. Rothwell said at the very beginning, it's not always for the best interest. Sometimes they're doing it just because it's the bottom line. And to be honest, I will pull you however we need to pull you. So if that's what you got to do to get more diversity in, hey, let's do that. But the resistant leader, because they're saying, to Phil's point, they're not leaders, they're resistant because we've always done it this way. We always is, you know what, Josh? All right, fair. And when I said that, like this book, we spoke to that from a North American perspective, in particular, looking at the United States. When you talk about going from culture to culture, you have to understand as we move continent to continent, culture differs, diversity changes, because then it can become about faith, it can become about region, it can become about who is the leader or how you select leaders. So I appreciate, Josh, I appreciate the comment. And I was just looking for the example, but to get to the resistant leader, it's because no one has ever challenged them. They feel like they can't be challenged. So they feel like their position is secure. If I go back to the phone model and I'm using the Canadian company of RIM, explain to them what happened to BlackBerry. BlackBerry didn't change, BlackBerry didn't adjust, and by the time they decided to pivot, it was too late. Yep. If your organization decides to pivot into diversity too late, you'll go the same way as BlackBerry. I mean, people still use it, but they're in the government and people don't like them like that. But it's just that idea of how that engagement works.
So I think we have time for one more question. We are well over an hour, you guys, and I think we could talk about this for hours. But Nancy has patiently had her hand up for so long. So Nancy, you get our final question.
Well, I just want to say, Mr. Campbell, you really answered a lot of what I was wanting to hear, but I just wanted to kind of give some context. As a Black DEI consultant, I've been in this position where, you come in, you want to do the deep work, you push, and you know that you're not going to get the buy-in that you want, then you get pushed out. So experiencing that kind of exhaustion and fatigue, and I so appreciate this session and the book. I ordered it too, but just because I have always felt, with my background also in organizational behavior, that we need DEI is like the greatest change management process if you really can get people to do the change work. And yeah, I'm really wanting more a support and networking around just, how to keep working, moving the big boulder up the mountain, because these things keep happening over and over and over again, where people want to do the checking the box, or they want to do the optics of looking like you're doing DEI. And I'm doing more around racial equity work beyond just diversity. But then you end up becoming the problem because people are not ready for the change. Thank you.
Well, Nancy, I appreciate it, and we appreciate the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
And we also understand that this is disruptive work. This is also not crystal stair work. This isn't easy. And so we say it from that standpoint of the engagement has to be there. And it's not going to be easy, but coming to programs like this, joining in organizations like this, it is. And see, you've already got a colleague there that's reached out. So making these efforts to become a more cohesive community around diversity is what we want to do. So I don't know what else we can do to support you today, because I'm going to try to stop talking.
Thank you.
But know that you have colleagues. And I know Phil is trying to get in, so we're about to have another 20 minutes.
I want to thank you guys. I really feel like this, I have a lot of favorites, but this is one of my favorites, you guys. I could literally talk about this for hours and hear you speak about it. Make sure you get the book, Rethinking Organizational Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I will try to save the chat and send it out because there were so many good comments. Our talk next month is on OD and the accidental practitioner. I will send the link out to everybody who's registered when I send the replay of this. And any last words before we go, gentlemen?
No, we just want to thank you all for coming.
I think Phil will have Phil, you can have my space.
So, and Nancy, the last thing I would just say on that is, again, when we look through those steps, and one of them was looking at who has authority to change, you don't always, as the person that's directing it, you don't always have to be the one to force things out. Be a horse whisperer. Go to someone who can make those changes and be like, hey, you know what probably work? Why don't we try this? Let them bring it up in the next board meeting or in the next staff meeting. Let them, say those different things. Because again, they, depending on how the DEI position was hired, it could be for show. And so people aren't really trying to hear what that person has to say. But they're going to listen to the head of the HR because they're the head of HR. So if you can be that ghost whisperer to some of these other people around and get them to make those recommendations, and it doesn't have to be that they're making it because they're full on for DEI. But if it makes sense that, they can be like, yeah, we're going to do this change, because at the end of the day, the goal is to get those changes done. And then we can eventually, continue to build off that good work. So just another thing to put out there.
And one last reminder, right after this, please call or contact someone who needs to hear from you today. I think we made some connections today, and I really hope that you will reach out to each other.